Today, we are diving into executive function. And if you are a speech pathologist, this is a cannot miss episode. And that's because the latest research is finding that executive function challenges are much more widespread than originally thought. So, really, when it comes to every single child on your caseload, you are going to want to consider whether or not this child has executive function difficulties, and you're going to want to create educationally rich activities that improve executive function. We are going to dive into that next week. There's going to be a part 2 in which we talk about what do we do about executive function difficulties. Today's episode, we're going to talk about who executive function difficulties impact. So this latest research just came out in 2025, and we're starting to identify these new populations we didn't talk about before when it came to executive function. Today, we're talking about the who. Now, before we dive into who has executive function difficulties, let's talk about what executive function is. I like to use Adele Diamond, who's considered the grandmother of executive function. I like to use her 3-part definition of what executive function is. There's 3 major components. The first is attention and inhibitory control. It's that ability to ignore the distracting stimuli, the competing stimuli, and focus on the task at hand. The second area of executive function is verbal working memory, the ability to take that large pieces of information verbally and verbal pieces of information, retain it, and then express it or put it to use. The third area of executive function that we're going to focus on is cognitive flexibility. That means that depending on the different environmental stimuli, you're going to behave in a different manner. So that has to do with problem solving. When something comes up and you have a problem, are you able to think flexibly, or is there rigidity in which you do something different to respond to that problem to get results? So you can also think of cognitive flexibility in the sense of a child that's doing something they're really engaged in, such as building a castle with blocks, and it's time to clean up. Are they able to stop what they're doing and go ahead and put the blocks away? Do they have that cognitive flexibility? So what we're going to dive into first is the who. Now, this week is all about the who, and I'm going to start with the neurodevelopmental impairments or delays that children present with. So the latest research indicates that children with ADD, children with autism, children with specific language disorders, children with dyslexia, this group of neurodevelopmental delays, they are more likely to present with executive function challenges. And it's pretty significant when you compare them to neurotypical peers on executive function testing. They are scoring about a half a standard deviation worse than their neurotypical peers as a group. So that's a medium effect size. It's a pretty big difference when we're looking at these groups compared to neurotypical peers. Now, the second area of children that are going to be on your caseload that you're looking at that are going to present with executive function difficulties are children with developmental language disorder. Now, across ages, so whether you're looking at a child in preschool, school age, high school, you are going to find a delay, are likely going to find a delay in verbal working memory. This is a hallmark of children with developmental language disorder, regardless of their native language. That's that ability to retain chunks of language, and then you're able to express them or put them to use. So perhaps it's following multiple step directions. Perhaps it's someone tells you a story and then you retell that story. Perhaps it's nonsense syllables, and I'm going to have you repeat back these nonsense syllables if you want to make sure that it's not because of cultural differences that the child's performing differently in that task. So this is an area that we know that children with developmental language disorders are going to present with. Now, some of the newest and greatest research we have is also showing that children with speech sound disorders are at a statistically significant greater risk to have executive function difficulties. Now, when I say speech sound disorders, This is really important to know. Even the children with distorted R's or distorted S's, even these children with these mild speech sound substitutions, speech sound distortions, are presenting with a greater likelihood to have executive function difficulties. Now, when we move into speech sound disorders, you're going to find children that have more significant speech sound disorders to have an even greater likelihood. So you move into the children with phonological processes, and the research is suggesting they are more likely than the children with the distortions to have executive function difficulties. If you move up a level to the children with the speech motor disorders, such as apraxia of speech, they are more likely to have executive function difficulties than the children with the phonological processes, and the phonological processes more so than the children with the articulation impairment, the distortions, the mild impairments. However, all of them as a group, when we look at children with speech sound disorders, are more likely to have executive function difficulties. So there's no such thing as just our tick. Now, we are now going to move into a new area that the research is showing is executive function difficulties are more prevalent in children who are stuttering. Now, of course, this study that just came out in 2025 is only of 40 children, 20 that are neurotypical and 20 who are stuttering. And what they found is the children that were stuttering were more likely in a statistically significant level to have difficulties with verbal working memory and visual working memory. So this is important to keep in mind. You're already thinking about therapy. If you're thinking about the children who stutter, and you can think about how difficult, when they stutter, the more difficult tasks are the narrative task, the telling story task, the longer and more complex pieces of language. So that is really going to tax executive function and verbal working memory. So we're looking at basically now all of the children on our caseload are at greater risk for executive function difficulties. Now, keeping that in mind, what I want you to do is think about how you can create educationally rich activity that you're going to use with every single child on your caseload. You're going to use the universal design for learning principles, and these principles are principles in which we're connecting the information to the child's interest, to the child's life, to motivate the child, to engage the child. That's really important. Secondly, we're presenting this information in a multimodal manner. It means we're using movement, we're using music, we're using, of course, the visual and the auditory. We're going to use the emotion. We're going to act it out. We're going to use touch. We're going to use 3D. We're going to make it multimodal how we present it. And we're also going to think about being multimodal in how the child participates. So thinking about all of those things, you have the universal design for learning principles in your mind. You're thinking about how can I create one activity, a single activity that can engage all of the children on my caseload that's going to improve executive function. I'm leaving you with that for home practice. This is something that I like to have a problem to stew on it for a while, and then some great ideas come up. And when great ideas come up, I like to go to a Google Doc and capture them there. If you like, write them down. But think about that. So what I'm leaving you to think about is that every single child on your caseload is at greater risk for executive function difficulties. You're going to think about what kind of activity that's educationally rich can I curate that would engage all of the children on my caseload? What kind of activity would I create that's multimodal in nature so that when I'm conveying this activity to the child, when I'm conveying it, it's in a multimodal, multisensory manner? How can I provide opportunities for the child to participate in the learning experience in a multimodal manner as well? So I don't want you to think about developing 40 different activities for 40 different kids on your caseload. I want you to think about being one and done, creating one educationally rich, inclusive activity using the universal design for learning principles that's going to improve executive function, because this is something that every child on your caseload is going to need. We need to stop thinking in our field about treating a mouth and start thinking more holistically about treating a child. So let those ideas emerge over this next week, and I'm going to share with you next week what we can do, what I've done on my back porch, what the research is showing is working in improving executive function in a manner that you could use with every single child on your caseload. But for the time being, do what you do best, which is to roll up your sleeves and to make the world a better place. One child at a time, you will always be first.